We will control the vertical.
Welcome to this episode of Anthologic Phase 1. We are covering an episode of an anthology series presented by the BBC from 1968. Now, I did mention at the end of the last episode where I covered Casino Royale. It was the kind of end of Phase 1 because I'd gone through all of the series that I could find, anthologies that I could find. But I kind of pretty much knew I was going to uncover more ones because that's the nature of them. The more you look, the more you find. And I do dig very hard to try and find anthology series I haven't yet covered. But it's like, I felt like I'd come to the end. However, new ones keep turning up. In fact, I've got a couple for you. And this is the first of them. This I uncovered because for my Phase 2 first Phase 2 episodes, was covering Dead of Night, an anthology series that was on the BBC in 1972, and I found in the notes that it was someone considers this the spiritual successor of this series I'm about to talk about, late night horror. So I uncovered a new one. It turns out there was only one surviving episode. It was originally broadcast in colour, and there were colour recordings. It was indeed repeated 2 years later in 1970, but then the tapes were lost or erased, so there was no existing recordings. However, this one, which was episode 3 of the series, did turn up as a black and white telecast that was given to a film institute, and it was available in black and white, and it is available on YouTube in black and white. The episode is called "The Corpse Can't Play." Now, I've dug out some further info about this. This was actually restored somewhat into a colour form and released as a DVD on its own. Late Night Horror Corpse Can't Play. I've looked into it. You can still purchase it. However, it's very expensive. For a single episode of TV, it's a little too expensive to acquire. So I went to YouTube and watched a black and white version. I did also find some clips of some of the other episodes that were available, showing it in colour. Showing this episode in colour and showing other ones in colour. One thing that sort of piqued my interest about this is when I first researched it, it was apparently it was cancelled because there were too many complaints about it being too horrific, which intrigued me no end. I presume it was on late at night, and the content of this episode suggests it's definitely after the watershed, after 9 p.m. There was stuff in here that just wouldn't be broadcast before 9 p.m. And I can kind of see why there were complaints as well watching this episode. And I saw it in black and white. It's got to be murdered. So the colour must have been a shock. So it's kind of interesting. The series was broadcast from the 11th of April 1968 through to the 16th of May 1968. So weekly episodes. And it kind of intrigues me. Some of the authors of the episodes are kind of intriguing. The first one, for example, is called No Such Thing as a Vampire. A story based on Richard, written by Richard Matheson, the great Richard Matheson, that horror sort of thriller writer. And another one that I kind of knew the name of, episode 2, was William and Mary by Roald Dahl. This one I am familiar with. I've read quite a lot of Roald Dahl short stories, so I know the story. And I actually looked at this episode, and it apparently has been adapted 4 times for TV, various anthology series. Kind of interesting. This one, Tales of the Unexpected, which is where I know it from. I have seen that episode of Tales of the Unexpected. But also a series called Way Out and Price of Fear, which I think I've covered both of those shows. I haven't done William and Mary, but I've covered both of those shows. So it is kind of a reused one. But yeah, and there's various others. There's one, for example, based on the works of Arthur Conan Doyle called The Kiss of Blood. That was a very final episode. So I am going to be talking about The Corpse Can't Play. Now, this one's a striking one. It's based on a children's party, but a boy turns up who wasn't actually invited with a rather good present, but the guy whose party it is called Ronnie, and we're talking about 10-year-olds, maybe 11-year-olds, does not want this new boy really to be there, Simon Potter. But his mother insists he be made welcome, be played part of the games, and the kids are kind of mean to him, but letting him play. But as it transpires, there's lots of snipes and jokes about what his father does. And in fact, Ronnie instigates the game with, you got to mime out what your father does. And people were miming, various sort of activities. However, when Simon Potter refuses to act out his, Ronnie says, I'll do it for you, and then lays on the floor and puts his hand over his chest like a corpse laid out, for burial. Basically, Simon's father has died. So Simon's quite upset, and indeed they play a trick on him and lock him in a cupboard, and then don't sort of comment on it. When his mum asks, Ronnie's mum asks where Simon is, he's like, I don't know. So they've locked him in a tiny little cupboard. Meanwhile, the father of the boy having a birthday party, who sort of goes in and sees how they're doing, asks to suggest games, so on. He turns up. He kind of goes and sees the kids, and they asked him to suggest games and stuff like that. And we see him going down the hallway and hearing the sort of banging on the cupboard. So Simon is banging on the cupboard outside. Anyway, things take a really nasty turn. I suggest you see this yourself. However, the end was bloody and gratuitous and shocking, actually. I was really surprised how far it went. It's kind of Hammer film levels of gore and effect, which I did not expect. And I can see why it had late night complaints. I really can. It must have, given its title, it must have been late in the evening. I don't know what time it was, but given it's called Late Night Horror, I'm going to guess it's like 11:30 or something. So it's kind of gratuitous. The Simon Potter, I think it's kind of interesting because he's clearly a bit unusual, and the other kids do not like him. The parents think he's alright because he's polite and quiet, but he's, basically is a touch of the psychopath, possibly. And the twist or the turn at the end kind of plays that out quite strongly. It's quite an effective piece, this. I thought it was interesting. And it is interesting, there's a game in it, which they don't name in the thing, called, I think, Nelson's Eye, where basically strange things are... people will put on blindfolds on and told to feel things and guess what they are, and odd things are put in. It's called Nelson's Eye, I believe, and that was mentioned as a party game in the episode from Dead of Night called The Exorcism. So it's almost like the writer of that was kind of influenced, wanted to reference this somewhat, but it could be a sheer coincidence. Absolute coincidence. This particular episode aired on the 25th of April 1968, by the way. So, yeah, strong one. I couldn't find much about the press about it at the time either. Couldn't find anything about it. But I'm sure there was some consternation about it. It probably got complaints, I'm going to guess, because the media started kicking up a fuss about it, as they do when they've got nothing better to do. It's one of those. Interesting show, 6 episodes, 5 of which are lost completely, one of which you can get a colour version if you're willing to shell out for the DVD, but there is the black and white one available on YouTube. So yeah, I'd recommend a watch. This is kind of interesting. Anyway, I'm going to sign off there. I don't want to spoil it any further. I'm going to sign off there, but before I go, may I ask, is anybody out there? I'm not.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to